The transmission came from the edge of known space, and it reached every planet where humans lived within seconds. High Arbiter Xyrith stood tall on the bridge of his obsidian flagship, his 4 eyes burning with cold fire as he delivered his message to the small species that had dared to expand into territories near the Volthari. Dominion creatures of Earth, his voice echoed across 12 star systems. You have been judged and found unworthy of existence, and the Dominion has spoken with one voice, declaring upon your kind the sacred right of total war, which means we will not stop until every human is gone from this galaxy, and your worlds are dust, and your memory is erased from history itself. He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. You have 7 of your Earth days to surrender unconditionally, or we begin the extinction of your species. The transmission ended, and Xyrith turned to his war council with satisfaction on his face. How long until they respond with their pleas for mercy? Asked Admiral Kethrix, his second-in-command, based on our studies of 93 other species. I expect surrender negotiations within 2 hours, Xyrith replied, and full capitulation within the day. They waited 2 hours past, and nothing came from the humans. 4 hours passed, and still nothing. Xyrith began to feel something he had not felt in centuries. Confusion. Perhaps their communication systems are primitive, suggested one of his advisors, and they need more time to organize a response. Finally, after 6 hours, a transmission came back from Earth. Admiral Helena Vasquez appeared on screen, sitting at a desk in what looked like a break room, and she was eating a sandwich. She looked at the screen while chewing, and her expression showed nothing but mild curiosity. She swallowed her food, took a sip of coffee, and said, "Okay, and?" The War Council stared in silence. "What does she mean?" whispered Admiral Kethrix. Vass continued, "Look, we got your message. Very dramatic, by the way. Loved the lighting. But we need to know if you have any actual demands or if this is just a general, we are gonna kill you kind of thing. Because we have a lot of paperwork to do, and we need to know how to categorize this." Xyrith felt his composure crack. Does she not understand? He demanded of his cultural analysts. Did the translation fail? The translation was perfect, High Arbiter, replied the lead analyst, her voice shaking. She understood every word. Then why is she not afraid? No one had an answer. Xyrith ordered the declaration sent again, this time with detailed images of their weapons, their conquered worlds, and the extinction events they had caused. And surely this would make the humans understand the danger they faced. The humans received the second transmission, and something strange began to happen within hours. Human communication networks exploded with activity, but it was not the panic and fear that Xyrith expected. It was laughter. Someone had taken his image from the declaration and turned it into what humans called a meme, and now billions of people were sharing pictures of his face with silly captions. One popular image showed his 4 eyes with the text, "When you declare total war but the enemy asks for your manager." Another showed his dramatic pose with the words, "Me telling my siblings I am going to destroy them before mom gets home." His speech had been turned into a song, and it was climbing the music charts on 3 different planets. Humans were dancing to his declaration of extinction. This is impossible, Xyrith said as he watched the reports come in. No species has ever reacted this way, and we have done this 93 times before, High Arbiter, said an intelligence officer. Running into the council chamber, we have more concerning news. What could possibly be more concerning than this? Human military recruitment has increased by 300% since your declaration. Xyrith stared at the officer. That cannot be correct. Because when species face extinction, their military forces collapse as soldiers desert to be with their families. That is what normally happens. High Arbiter, but humans are different, and they are not joining the military out of fear. Then why are they joining? The officer swallowed hard before answering. Our analysts believe they are joining because they are excited. And they think this will be fun. The council fell into stunned silence on Earth. In coffee shops and living rooms and military bases, humans were gathering to watch the alien declaration on repeat. And they were not crying or praying or writing final letters to loved ones. They were making jokes. Did you see his face when he said extinction? Laughed a teenager in Tokyo. He looked so serious. Like my dad when I forget to take out the trash. I hope they actually show up, said a retired Marine in Texas. Because I have been waiting my whole life for something interesting to happen. My grandmother says she lived through 3 end-of-the-world events, said a young woman in Lagos. And she says this one does not even make her top 5 in the halls of the United Defense Council. Admiral Vasquez met with her commanders to discuss strategy. So these Valkyrie have conquered over 200 worlds, said General Morrison. Looking at the intelligence reports, and they have weapons that can crack planets. And they have been doing this for thousands of years. That is correct, said Vasquez. And we are supposed to be scared of them. According to them, yes. General Morrison laughed. Have they met us? He asked. Do they know what we have done to ourselves and each other over the centuries? Because I feel like they did not do their research. They appear to have studied only our public communications, said an intelligence officer. And they concluded we are a fragile and emotional species prone to panic. Fragile? Said Morrison. We literally set our own planet on fire multiple times and kept going. And we invented nuclear weapons and pointed them at ourselves. And we created artificial intelligence knowing it might kill us all. And we did all of this while arguing about which sports team is better. Vasquez nodded. Sender replied to the Valkyrie. She said, and tell them we accept their declaration of total war. Should we include terms of negotiation, Admiral? No, she said with a smile. Just include a link to the song they made from his speech. Because I think it reached #1 on the charts this morning. Far away on the Obsidian flagship. Arbiter Zareth received a human response. He did not understand the link they sent. So he clicked on it. His own voice began playing back at him, set to a bouncy electronic beat. And somewhere in the background of the music he could hear humans laughing for the first time in his long life. Zareth felt something cold crawl up his spine. Was not fear exactly. Was the terrible realization that he had made. Mistake, these creatures were not going to be like the others. These creatures were going to be a problem. 1 month after the declaration, the Valkyrie 9th Extinction Fleet dropped out of hyperspace above the human colony of New Brisbane. And Commander Desic stood on his bridge with confidence in his heart. This fleet had destroyed 47 worlds, and it had never known defeat. And today it would teach humanity what happened to species that refused to surrender. Scan the colony, Desic ordered. And show me how many ships are fleeing. The scanner officer worked his console and then stopped with confusion on his face. Commander, there are no ships fleeing. They must be hiding their evacuation routes. So scan again. I have scanned 3 times, Commander. And there is no evacuation happening at all. Desic walked to the scanner display and looked for himself. The colony below was not panicking. People were moving around calmly. And some appeared to be working on strange projects. And many were gathered in groups that looked almost like they were having parties. What are they doing? Desic asked. Unknown, Commander, but our analysts believe they are preparing some kind of defense. Defense? Desic laughed. This is a farming colony with no military base, and we have 600 warships. So what defense could they possibly prepare? He gave the order to begin the attack. The first wave of fighters descended toward the colony. And that was when everything went wrong from the fields below. Thousands of small objects rose into the air. And the scanner officer shouted in alarm. Commander, I am detecting over 9,000 incoming projectiles. What kind of weapons do they have? They are not weapons, Commander. They appear to be farming drones. But they have been modified with explosive charges. The drones slammed into the fighter wave with no regard for their own survival. An explosion after explosion lit up the sky as Valkyrie pilots screamed on the communications channels. They turned their farming equipment into bombs? Desik said in disbelief. That is correct, Commander. And they are very effective bombs. Desik ordered the second wave forward. And this time, he sent heavy assault ships that could withstand small explosions. The assault ships made it through the drone swarm and began their approach to the colony. But then the asteroids started moving, Commander. The mining platforms in the asteroid belt are firing at us. Mining platforms cannot fire weapons. They have attached mass drivers to the asteroids, Commander. And they are launching rocks at our ships at very high speeds. A massive chunk of iron slammed into an assault ship and cracked it. In half, Desik watched in horror as his fleet began to take damage from rocks. Simple rocks that humans had figured out how to throw very hard. Land-ground forces immediately, he ordered. And I want boots on that colony within the hour. The troop transports descended through the chaos and managed to land on the outskirts of the main settlement. And Valkyrie soldiers poured out ready to crush any resistance. They were met by an old woman holding a very large gun. GJ. Love, said Gertrude Chen, age 82, former mining engineer and current leader of the new Brisbane Welcoming Committee. You picked the wrong colony. She fired. And the homemade railgun in her hands sent a metal slug through the chest of the lead Valkyrie soldier with enough force to knock down the 3 soldiers behind him all around her. Humans emerged from hiding places with weapons that looked like they had been built in garages and workshops. Because they had been built in garages and workshops, the battle was Chaos Valkyrie soldiers advanced with discipline and training. But humans fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. And worse than that, they were enjoying themselves. On your left, mate, shouted a farmer as he tackled a Valkyrie twice his size. I got 3. How many did you get? Yelled a teenager who had built a flamethrower from kitchen supplies. Stop counting and keep shooting, laughed Gertrude as she reloaded her railgun. The Valkyrie commanders could not understand what they were hearing on the intercepted human communications. These people were losing, objectively speaking, because the Valkyrie had more soldiers and better weapons. But the humans did not seem to know they were losing. They were laughing and joking and calling out to each other like this was a game. I really wanted to go fishing this weekend, complained one human as he threw a grenade. But I guess alien invasion works too. Focus, Dave, replied his companion. You can fish after we kick them off our planet, in orbit. Commander Desik was dealing with his own problems. A human squadron calling themselves the Absolute Lads had been causing trouble since the battle began, flying in patterns that made no tactical sense and somehow avoiding most of the Valkyrie weapons fire. Their movements are random and foolish, said his tactical officer. And yet they are incredibly effective. How is that possible? Our targeting computers are designed to predict rational behavior, Commander. And these humans are not behaving rationally. The lead ship of the Absolute Lads, piloted by a woman named Jackie Torres, opened a communication channel that all Valkyrie ships could hear. Hey, Desik, she said cheerfully. You look like you were having a bad day. How do you know my name? Desik demanded. We hacked your personnel files last week. And I have to say your employee reviews are not great. Because apparently, you take too long in the bathroom. The bridge crew stared at their commander, who felt heat rising in his face. That was confidential information. He shouted, Nothing is confidential when you are fighting humans, mate. And speaking of which, have you noticed that cargo ship heading toward your flagship? Desik spun to look at his tactical display. A massive cargo hauler was indeed approaching at high speed, and it was not slowing down destroy it immediately. We cannot get a lock, Commander, because it is spinning in a pattern our weapons cannot track. What is in that cargo ship? Sensors indicate fertilizer, Commander. Approximately 50,000 tons of ammonium nitrate. Besic barely had time to order evasive action before the cargo ship slammed into his flagship. The explosion was visible from the planet below, and humans everywhere stopped fighting to cheer. Direct hit, shouted Jackie Torres. The absolute lads send their regards. Commander Desic survived because he was in a reinforced section of the ship, but his flagship was crippled and his fleet was in disarray. And somehow a farming colony was winning against the most feared military force in the galaxy. He gave an order he had never given before. Retreat, he said, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. All ships retreat. The Ninth Extinction Fleet, undefeated for 400 years, fled from New Brisbane with their hulls scorched and their pride destroyed on the ground. Gertrude Chun gave an interview to a news drone that had been recording the battle. So how does it feel to defeat the Valkyrie? Asked the reporter through the drone. Gertrude smiled with sweat and dirt on her face and a railgun still warm in her hands. They came to our home expecting sheep, she said, and they found Australians instead. And that was their mistake. The interview went viral across every human world and eventually reached the Valkyrie. High Command High Arbiter Zereth watched it 17 times, trying to understand how an 82-year-old grandmother had become a symbol of human resistance. He could not understand these humans were impossible, and they were just getting started. 2 months into the war, the Valkyrie High Command gathered in their fortress on the throne world, and the mood was something that none of them had ever experienced before. They were confused. High Arbiter Zyrith sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his admirals and generals and intelligence chiefs, and every single one of them looked like they had not slept in weeks. Give me the latest reports. Zyrith commanded. The chief intelligence officer stood up with shaking hands and began to read from his datapad. Human military forces continued to advance on multiple fronts despite being outnumbered and outgunned on most of them. How is that possible? We do not know, High Arbiter, but we have some observations that may be relevant. He pressed a button and a hologram appeared showing a captured Valkyrie warship. The warship had been painted bright orange with purple spots, and someone had written beep beep on the hull in massive letters. What am I looking at? Zyrith asked. This is the Harbinger of Extinction, one of our most feared destroyers, which was captured by human forces last week. And they painted it? They spent 3 days painting it before they returned it to us with a note that said, "You left this at our house. We fixed it up for you. No need to thank us." They gave it back? They gave it back, High Arbiter, and our engineers found no bombs or traps or tracking devices. And they appeared to have genuinely just painted it for fun. Zyrith stared at the hologram for a long moment. Next. Report. He finally said. Another officer stood up. We have been tracking human psychological operations, and they are unlike anything we have encountered before. What kind of operations? Admiral Kethrix received a package last week at his personal quarters. Admiral Kethrix shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What was in the package? Zyrith asked. Chocolate, said the officer, and a handwritten note from a human commander that said, "Good fight yesterday. You look stressed. Please take care of yourself." Was the chocolate poisoned? No, High Arbiter. It was very good chocolate. And Admiral Kethrix ate all of it before we could test it. Everyone looked at Kethrix, who suddenly found the table very interesting to look at. It was really good chocolate, he mumbled. Zyrith rubbed his temples and tried to process what he was hearing. Continue, he said. Human forces have been taking prisoners, which is normal. But what they do with the prisoners is not normal at all. Do they torture them? No, High Arbiter. They teach them card games. Card games? Yes, And they share meals with them, and they tell them jokes. And when they release them, they give them snacks and small booklets. What is in the booklets? The officer hesitated. Propaganda. High Arbiter. But it is very strange propaganda. He displayed an image of a small pamphlet with a picture of a human and a Valkyrie sharing a drink. The text read, "War is dumb. Want a beer instead?" That is their propaganda? Zyrith said in disbelief. That is how they try to turn our soldiers against us? It appears to be working, High Arbiter, because desertion rates have increased by 40% among soldiers who have been captured and released. That is absurd. Because our soldiers are loyal and dedicated. They were loyal and dedicated, the officer corrected gently. But they returned from human captivity very confused and asking questions like, why are we fighting these people? They seem nice. Zyrith slammed his fist on the table. They are not nice. They are our enemies, and they must be destroyed. Of course, High Arbiter. The chief xenopsychologist stepped forward with fear on her face. I have been analyzing human behavior for the past 2 months, she said. And I have to tell you that my models are completely broken. What do you mean? Every psychological model we have says that a declaration of total war causes species-wide despair and collapse of social structures. But humans have become more unified since the declaration, and they are happier than they were before. Happier? Human surveys show that overall life satisfaction has increased since the war began, High Arbiter. And they are reporting higher levels of purpose and community connection. That makes no sense. Because we are trying to kill them all. I know. High Arbiter, and I cannot explain it. Zyrith decided to try a new strategy. He ordered his propaganda division to broadcast images of destroy human ships and fallen human soldiers across all human communication networks. Surely, this would remind them of the cost of war and break their spirits. The humans received the broadcast and responded with a funeral ceremony for their fallen. It was a beautiful ceremony with speeches about honor and sacrifice and the importance of fighting for what matters. And then, at the end, as the ceremony concluded, every human broadcast station began playing the same song. It took Zyrith 3 days to understand what Never Gonna Give You Up was and why humans found it so funny to play at serious moments. When he finally understood, he locked himself in his quarters for 6 hours. The xenopsychologist requested an audience with the High Arbiter after analyzing the funeral broadcast. I believe I understand humans now, she said. And her voice was hollow. Explain. They are not ignoring their fear, she said. Because they do feel fear, and they do feel grief. And they do understand that they might die. Then why do they act this way? Because they have decided that the alternative is worse, High Arbiter. And they would rather laugh at death than let death make them stop living. That is irrational. Yes, it is completely irrational, and that is why it works. She pulled up data on human history, showing wars and plagues and disasters that should have destroyed them. They have faced extinction many times, she said, and they have always survived by refusing to take it seriously. Because taking it seriously would mean accepting that they might lose. And humans do not accept losing. What are you saying? I am saying that they are broken, High Arbiter, but they are broken in a way that makes them stronger. And I do not know how to fight that. Zyrith dismissed her and sat alone in the council chamber for the first time. He began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. These humans did not fight like any species he had ever conquered. They fought like they had nothing to lose, and worse than that, they fought like they were having the time of their lives. He received a message from his frontline commanders. High Arbiter. The message read, human forces have begun playing loud music during battles, and our soldiers find it very distracting. And several have reported that the music is quite good, and they would like to know the names of the songs. Zyrith read the message 3 times, then he poured himself a drink. Because he needed one somewhere out there? Humans were dancing their way through a galactic war, and he had no idea how to stop them. 6 months into the war, humanity went on the offensive, and the galaxy would never be the same. The strategy came from Admiral Helena Vasquez herself during a meeting with her top commanders. "We could defeat them with conventional warfare," she said, looking at the star map that showed Velthury territory. "But that would take years and cost millions of lives. What is the alternative?" asked General Morrison. "We break them," Vasquez replied. "Not their ships, not their planets, but their minds." She unveiled a plan that made every commander in the room smile. They called it Operation Absolute Madness. The first phase targeted Velthury communication networks, which controlled all propaganda and news broadcasts across their empire. Human hackers, working alongside captured Velthury, who had decided they liked humanity better, found a way into the main broadcast system on a quiet evening across 600 Velthury worlds. The evening news suddenly changed. Instead of war updates and propaganda about human defeat, every screen began showing a human television program called Friends. Millions of Velthury watched in confusion as 6 humans sat in a coffee shop and talked about their relationships and jobs. They could not look away within a week. Friends was the most watched program in Velthury space within 2 weeks. Velthury civilians were having arguments about whether Ross and Rachel belonged together. Within a month, underground fan clubs had formed, and Velthury were learning English just to understand the jokes that the translation missed. High Arbiter Zyrith ordered the broadcast stopped, but every time his technicians fixed the network, human hackers broke in again and added more shows. "They are now showing something called The Office," reported his communication chief, "and my own staff will not stop quoting from it." "Make them stop watching," Zyrith commanded. "I cannot." "High Arbiter, because they watch it on their personal devices during breaks. And if I ban it, they will watch it in secret. And honestly, I have also become quite fond of a character named Dwight." Zyrith did not know what to do with that information. That the second phase of Operation Absolute Madness was more direct human special forces, nicknamed the Chaos Marines, began conducting operations designed not to destroy but to humiliate. Their first major operation targeted the Velthury shipyard at Kethros Prime, the largest military construction facility in the Dominion. Velthury security expected sabotage or explosives instead. The Chaos Marines spent 3 nights sneaking through the facility with paint when morning came. Every ship in the yard had been painted bright pink. The words, "Hawk, if you want peace," were written across each hull in letters 10 meters tall. No ships were damaged, no workers were harmed, but every single Velthury who saw the footage knew that humans had walked through their most secure facility like it was a playground. "This is psychological warfare on a scale we have never seen," said the Velthury Minister of Security. "And I do not know how to defend against paint." The Chaos Marines continued their campaign. They replaced the flags at Velthury military bases with flags that had silly faces on them. They hacked into official announcement systems and played human party music for hours. They left rubber ducks in the offices of high-ranking officials with notes that said QUACK. No one was killed, nothing was destroyed, but the Velthury military was becoming a joke. And everyone knew it. Admiral Vasquez then decided to attack where it would hurt most. Velthury honor, she sent a formal challenge to High Arbiter Zyrith through official diplomatic channels. "I challenge you to single combat," her message read. "But not to the death, because that would be barbaric. Instead, I challenge you to a game of chess, 1 match, winner takes nothing. Loser admits the other played well." The challenge was broadcast across the galaxy. Zyrith could not accept, because he did not know how to play chess, and learning would take too long, and losing to a human would be unthinkable. But he could not refuse either, because refusing a formal challenge was a sign of cowardice in Veltri culture. He chose to refuse. Humans broadcast his refusal everywhere with commentary. The High Arbiter of the mighty Veltri Dominion, said a human news anchor, who has conquered 200 worlds, is afraid to play a board game against a human grandmother. Vasquez was not actually a grandmother, but humans thought it was funnier to call her one of Elthari honor culture's shattered soldiers who had been raised to believe in the invincibility of their leaders. Now saw that their supreme commander was afraid of a game. Meanwhile, the other species in the Dominion began to reconsider their loyalty. Veltri had conquered 6 species and forced them to fight in their armies. But those species were now watching humans and seeing something they had never seen before. They were seeing someone fight back and win and laugh while doing it. If the humans are not afraid, whispered a slave soldier from the conquered world of Threxus, then why are we afraid? That whisper spread from world to world. 3 species that had been conquered by the Veltri sent secret messages to human command. We wish to request protection, the messages said, and we wish to know if humans would accept us as allies instead of subjects. Vasquez replied to each message personally. We do not take subjects, she wrote, but we are always happy to make friends. And by the way, have you seen Friends? Because we can send you the complete series if you are interested. The Dominion was fracturing. Jarth received reports of rebellion on a dozen world species that had been loyal for centuries were suddenly asking questions about why they fought for the Veltri. The humans have done more damage with television and paint than we did with weapons, said one of his advisors. That is impossible, Zyrith replied, but he knew it was true. He looked at the star map and saw his empire falling apart, not because humans were stronger, not because humans had better weapons, but because humans had shown the galaxy that the Veltri could be laughed at, and once someone became a joke, they could never be feared again. Zyrith called his remaining loyal commanders to a meeting. We must end this war, he said, and every commander stared at him in shock. High Arbiter, we cannot surrender, because that would be the end of everything we built. I know, said Zyrith, and for the first time in his long life, he looked tired. But fighting has made everything worse, and the longer we fight, the more we lose. What would you have us do? Zyrith was silent for a long moment. Find a way to end this, he finally said. Before there is nothing left to save on the human side. Admiral Vasquez received intelligence that the Veltri were ready to negotiate. She smiled and poured herself a cup of coffee. Took them long enough, she said. And honestly, I thought the rubber ducks would have done it sooner. 1 year after the declaration of total war, High Arbiter Zyrith walked into a room he never thought he would enter it. It was a small conference room on a neutral station, and across the table sat Admiral Helena Vasquez with a cup of coffee in her hands and a slight smile on her face. The war was over. The Dominion had not been destroyed, but it had been broken in ways that weapons could never achieve. And now Zyrith was here to sign a ceasefire that his ancestors would have considered the ultimate shame. He sat down and looked at the human who had defeated him. She looked back with eyes that held no hatred, no triumph, just a calm curiosity that made him feel small. So, Vasquez said, Here we are. Zyrith agreed. The negotiation was quick because there was nothing to negotiate. The Dominion would withdraw from human space. The conquered species would be given the choice to leave the Dominion if they wished. No territory would change hands. No reparations would be paid. It was a mercy that Zyrith did not deserve and could not understand. Why? He asked after the documents were signed. Why do you not demand more? Because you could take half our empire if you wanted. We do not want your empire, Vasquez replied. Because empires are heavy, and we already have enough problems at home. But you won. And winners take prizes. Not always. Zareth shook his head in frustration. I need to understand something, he said. And his voice was tired and broken, because I have spent a year trying to understand, and I still cannot. Ask, why did you not fear us? Vasquez set down her coffee and looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. Do you really want to know? I need to know, because we have ended civilizations. And we have conquered 200 worlds, and we declared your extinction. And you responded with jokes and television shows and rubber ducks. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. How old are you? She asked. I am 947 of your Earth years. And in that time, how many times has your species faced extinction? Zareth thought about the question. Never, he admitted. Because we have always been the strongest. And no one has ever threatened us. That is your answer, said Vasquezareth did not understand. So she continued. Humanity is 300,000 years old. And in that time, we have almost destroyed ourselves more times than we can count. She pulled up her datapad and showed him a timeline. Ice ages that nearly froze us to death. Plagues that killed half our population. Wars where we invented weapons that could end all life on our planet. And then pointed those weapons at each other. Why would you point weapons at your own species? Because we are idiots sometimes. But that is not the point. She scrolled through more history. Climate change that we caused ourselves. Artificial intelligence that we built knowing it might replace us. Diseases that we created in laboratories. Asteroids that came close enough to give us nightmares. Your history is terrifying, Zareth said. Yes, it is. And that is exactly why we laughed at you, Vasquez leaned forward. Every generation of humanity grew up being told that the world was ending. And every generation woke up the next morning and made coffee and went to work anyway. But the threat was real. The threat was always real. And we knew it was real, and we faced it anyway. How? By refusing to let it win, she said. And the only way to refuse is to keep living. And the only way to keep living is to find joy even in darkness. And the only way to find joy is to laugh at the things that want to kill you. Zareth stared at her. You laughed at us because you have practiced laughing at death for thousands of years. Yes, and you made jokes because jokes are how you survive. Yes, and you fought without fear because you have already accepted that you might die at any moment. Not accepted, Vasquez corrected. Because we do not want to die, and we fear death as much as anyone. But we have learned that fear cannot be allowed to stop us from living. She smiled. You threatened us with nothing we had not already threatened ourselves with. And the difference is that we learn to dance with the void instead of running from it. Zareth sat in silence for a long time. Something was changing inside him. Some old certainty cracking apart. We called you weak, he finally said. Because you were small and young and emotional. We are all of those things. But you are not weak. No, said Vasquez. We are not. She stood up and offered her hand in the human gesture of respect. Zareth looked at the hand for a moment, then took it. What happens now? He asked. Now you go home and figure out what kind of empire you want to be, she said. And we go home and argue about politics and sports and who makes the best coffee. That sounds very ordinary. It is. And that is the point. Zareth nodded slowly. There is one more thing I do not understand, he said. What? Your only demand in this treaty was open borders for cultural exchange. And I do not understand why that matters more than territory or resources. Vasquez smiled. Because territory and resources can be taken back, she said. But once your people have seen our television shows and eaten our food and heard our music, they will never be the same. You are going to conquer us with culture. We are going to befriend you with culture, she corrected. And in 100 years, Valkyrie children will be watching human cartoons and learning human dances and asking there, Parents, why we ever fought in the first place. Zyrith felt. Something strange happened to his face. It took him a moment to realize he was smiling. You are very dangerous. People, he said, we prefer to think of ourselves as aggressively friendly. The treaty was signed that day, and ships on both sides stood down. And the first war in history that had been won primarily through memes and television shows came to an end in the years that followed. Everything Vasquez predicted came. True Velthari children watched human cartoons and demanded human toys. Velthari philosophers studied human absurdism and wrote papers about the power of latter Velthari. Musicians learned human songs and created new music that blended both cultures. And on the Velthari throne world, in a small bar in the capital city, a former soldier named Thesic sat across from a human named Jackie Torres. She was the pilot who had destroyed his flagship with a fertilizer bomb. And somehow they had become friends. I still do not understand humans, Thesic said as he sipped a drink that Jackie had introduced him to. That is okay, Jackie replied. We do not understand ourselves most of the time. How do you live with that? We just do, and we laugh about it. And we keep going. Thesic nodded and raised his glass. Teach me the human word for friend, he said. Friend, Jackie said. Thesic repeated it carefully, getting the sounds mostly right. Friend, he said again, and this time he smiled outside the bar. The stars shone down on a galaxy that was slowly changing. The Dominion was no longer an empire of fear, but was becoming something new. Something shaped by rubber ducks and television shows and the strange courage of a species that had learned to laugh at the end of the world and somewhere on Earth. Admiral Helena Vasquez retired to a small house by the ocean where she spent her days, drinking coffee and watching the waves. Reporters asked her sometimes about the war and her legacy. And she always gave the same answer. We did not beat them by being stronger, she would say. And we did not beat them by being smarter. And we certainly did not beat them by being more serious. We beat them by being human, which means being ridiculous and stubborn and hopeful all at the same time. And if that sounds crazy, well, it is crazy, but it is our kind of crazy. And it has kept us alive for 300,000 years. The galaxy had called humanity fragile and young and insignificant. They learned the truth too. Late humans were not survivors despite their madness. They were survivors because of it, and they would keep laughing all the way to the stars.